What does organic mean to you? Right, so this is the first part of the interactive part. How many of you are certified organic farmers? Right? The reason I ask this is I travel a lot. This year I traveled every single month for a week to 2 weeks, everywhere in the world, and I'm always looking for new organic farms to buy from. You're an organic farmer. You want me to buy from you? Okay. Many times I'm presented by or received in a way that is like, why do you want me to be organic? I don't know you. Why do you hate me so much? Right? So I guess those of you who are not organic, I'm going to ask, is your perception of being certified organic a negative perception? Does it look like a burden to you? Anyone? You're saying no? It's a little, let me come over here. I'll be like a game show.
No, I don't have questions. It's just to say
Right.
that.
Yeah, it is a little hard.
Y
Yeah.
se puede hablar en español o inglés y intentaré entender y traducir, pero no promesas.
What I'm often met with, people say, yes, I am organic, but they're not necessarily certified organic. So what certification does is it gives you a definition that everyone agrees to. In this case, everyone in the United States. Right? So I'm going to tell a story. When I was in Brazil in 2018, I'm a Cup of Excellence judge. I've done 28 juries with the Cup of Excellence. And so my company name is recognized as an organic coffee company. And someone approached us recognizing the t-shirt my fiance at the time was wearing. We're a group of 30 farmers. We're transitioning to organic. That's great. Let's talk some more. Well, it turns out they were doing this without any real knowledge of what organic was. They were trying to just not use pesticides. They were doing conventional and organic, and they had their conventional coffee on the hillside above the plain where they had their organic coffee. Right, so I pointed out to him that you know that there's a downward gravity, and there's a downward flow of water when it rains, and you're going to get that contamination. And he was like, we didn't think of that. So what certification does is it gives us a standard that everyone agrees to. In this case, if you want the USDA certification, this is what it is in a short way.
And importantly, it's in the U.S., it's without synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, chemicals.
Right. And these are some of the products that are certified. In California, the United States is kind of a strange country in that we're one country, but really we're one country made up of 50 countries. So California has its own organic program. Every single state has its own organic program that works under the federal umbrella, but it's implemented locally. And I sit on the commission that oversees the state of California's organic program. And so while it needs to meet at a minimum the federal level, it sometimes has to go, they want to go further. Organic is probably one of the most legislated words in the United States. Right? What I mean by that is, well, exactly what I said. There's lots of laws about how you can use it. And there are lots of penalties if you use it incorrectly. The penalty is $15,000 US per occurrence. And that is, depending on the inspector who catches the person, it could be, okay, we caught you, it's $15,000. Or, gee, you have a pallet of 100 boxes, that's 100 occurrences. So it really depends on how upset you make your inspector. That happened to a vendor of mine who, during one of my inspectors, when my inspection team was being audited by the USDA auditor saw a box of tea that was from a company that we bought from already packaged, and saw that it was labeled incorrectly and that they weren't certified to actually use the word organic. They are now, but I believe it cost them over $1 million US. I'm not going to say the name of the company because I don't think they know where it was discovered. I don't want them to know. Every country has its own definition. Just let's make it even more difficult. There's the US definition. There's almost 50 states of definition in the United States. And now there's all these different countries have different definition. Here's Colombia's definition.
And just to note here, it's very similar to the USDA organic definition. And an important part is that they do talk about comprehensive requirements for soil health, which is important for regenerative agriculture, and we'll talk about that later. And yeah, we don't have to go into much detail.
20 years ago, it meant something different, and so it's changed. And I recognized that when people who were certified organic, or saw people who were certified organic dumping their honey water into the local streams and creating algae blooms that were huge and suffocating local fish life, I'm thinking, why doesn't organic certification incorporate husbandry of the earth? And now, 20 years later, USDA has implemented that, and the regenerative organic movement has taken it a step further. What does regenerative mean? Okay, so there is no law about what regenerative means. So it's a real quagmire. On this committee that I sit on in California, there's a big discussion, big thing going on trying to define for the state of California what regenerative means. A lot of people want it to include organic. A lot of people don't. And the discussion becomes, do we want to have what's called a big tent approach? Meaning, do you need to be certified organic to sequester carbon in your soil? No. Should you be? Well, a lot of people say yeah. A lot of people say no. Because if it's about carbon sequestration only, it's about protecting the soil and the soil health. The organic contingent says, how can you speak about soil health while you're putting glyphosate into your soil and on your trees and poisoning the soil? Cognitive dissonance between that. That's kind of where I stand.
And we wanted to know what you all think.
Yeah, and that's the question. Is when you think of this, what is it that you think of?
We can pass the microphone to either what you think regenerative means or how it should be defined.
Someone raise your hand, or I'm just going to pick someone.
Yo pienso que significa que es algo, tomar algo y que en el tiempo debe convertirse en algo mejor, y es lo que buscamos con el suelo. El suelo en las universidades nos enseñaba el concepto de conservar. Conservar significa que si yo tengo este suelo y en el tiempo va a mantener las mismas condiciones. Y si aplicamos regenerativo significa que con las diferentes prácticas que yo voy a ir implementando en mi cafetal u otro cultivo, mi suelo va a mejorar. Si mejora mi suelo, entonces tendríamos ya un proceso de regeneración.
Yeah, so for the English speakers, a huge difference between conservation or sustainability and regenerative agriculture is conservation or sustainability is maintaining status quo in terms of soil, maintaining the health of the soil for however many years you can, whereas regenerative, as Neri said, is to improve soil health and improve your systems over the years to not only make it through as many years as you can, but make it better for future generations.
Right. In 2017, I gave a talk to the Santa Monica Chamber of Commerce. We were awarded a sustainability award, and it occurred to me that I just don't like that word sustainability, because I use the example of you're getting flushed down the toilet. Is that a position that you want to maintain and sustain, right? Or if you're hanging on the side of a cliff with one hand and your fingers are really hurting, do you want to sustain that situation? And anyone in this room who's a parent or likes kids or actually likes other humans, we're not in a position where we can sustain this and then also expect to sustain human life on this planet. And that's sort of what regenerative means to me. What am I leaving my 3 kids? What am I leaving your kids? Right? Particularly as a coffee roaster who, we have heat emissions and we do have carbon emissions, right? And we want to minimize that as much as possible and make sure that not just the farmers, who in my heart are the true custodians of the soil and the earth, but as humans, we're all the custodians of the earth, and we need to leave it not in the same shape that we're in, but in the better shape, so that the next generation can make it even better and safer, right? I'm looking, I think we have, this is still the old version.
Yeah, sorry it looked so much prettier before, but we didn't bring the newest version.
So basically, because there's no definition right now, it's anyone's definition can work. And there are a lot of people out there who want to tell you what regenerative means, right? I'm going to get a little crude here for a minute, but it's just like everyone has an asshole, everyone's got an opinion about what regenerative means.
So this is some of the international players in the regenerative certification realm. There's a huge range in terms of what the requirements are with synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, the time frame that they give a producer to implement changes, and whether or not the regenerative practices have to be totally implemented for 3 years, such as organic practices, or if it's a tiered system in which, as long as you continue to improve, you can get certified. So as Jeff said, Regenerative Organic Alliance is one of the harder, more comprehensive certifications. It requires organic, and it requires a third party to certify and audit the farms. And then an example of a tiered system in which it's easier for producers to enter the program is Regenified, and they don't require organic, so you can use synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. And yeah, it's kind of, as you can see, there's even more than this. It's kind of confusing looking at all of those certifications and reading all the details. So we have, ooh, this is our new one. So we have a lot of information in the notes of this, and we can like send it out because we kind of highlight the differences among them.
And not all of these are available internationally. Regenified, I think, just certified a farm in Costa Rica, although I don't know how, because they're really mostly like a ranching kind of setup. But if you ever see the movie Kiss the Earth, this is the group. And even though he speaks a great game in the movie, you know, only 20% of your crops or your fields have to be under the regenerative plan, and you're allowed to use glyphosate, which in my mind is, yeah, he's I don't know what he's doing. Yeah, it's here. Regen Agri. Anyone from Brazil? Anyone work with Expocacer? Besides, that's a pretty strong certification, I think. And there's, I think, 70 farms in Brazil that are under that certification. Doesn't require organic certification, but it does incorporate some of the things that you'll find in other of these certifications. Biodynamic Demeter, that's listed, but I don't really. I'm familiar with the certificate. I understand what it's about. I'm not so sure it's regenerative by design as opposed to by, it just is as a result of some of what they do. You don't need to bury a cow skull filled with gems, crystals, and herbs into your field to be regenerative, but that's one of the things that they propose. So here's some places in South and Central America that can help you. Like I said, everyone's got an opinion, and everyone's ready to take your money. This is just Central, South America, and the Caribbean. If you go to Regenerative International, there's a whole worldwide list, which is even longer.
Let's see.
Yeah. So for purposes of this talk, in my definition, it's about how can we save the world through farming and still be profitable, because let's face it, right? This is your business people, your business owners. And that's how I approach my relationships with the growers and co-ops we work with as other business owners. And and eventually as friends. That's, but what can we do, or what can you do, and what can I help you do? Because, as I mentioned at the beginning, the certification shouldn't be a burden that's carried alone, and it is an administrative burden and a financial burden. And one thing I learned on this trip was speaking to someone who has a farm, several farms, and they couldn't afford to maintain their organic certification. And I asked them, why did they ask for help from the people who are buying from them? Not everybody knows who's buying from them, right? Not everybody has a relationship with their buyers. Sometimes there's a co-op in the way, there's an exporter in the way, there's an importer in the way, and it takes a lot more than just coming down to the farm, shaking hands, and taking photos to have a relationship with someone, right? And see you again in 5 years, maybe. If you charge me too much, you won't see me again. It's important to go beyond the transactional, and that's how a lot of people say, oh, direct trade is great. I think it's just transactional. And to focus instead on the heart and relational. You know, are the people who you're buying from, will they recognize you when they see you again? Right? Will they give you a hug when they see you? Thank you, Anderson, and wherever you are. I thought saw you. That's important because this guy should have been able to go to the people who were buying from him and said, hey, I need to charge you 15 or 20 cents more so I can afford to get my maintain the certification and to continue to administer it and all the administrative work behind it. But I feel that some people are afraid to ask for for more. Maybe they undervalue what they do, or they're just afraid that by asking for more, they might hurt the relationship. And we'll talk a little bit more later, and anyone who wants to talk to me about that, I will just talk for hours about the importance of, relationship.
Oh, I can take this one. So, yeah, just reiterating that regenerative is mostly focusing on soil health, and that is one thing that all of those certifications you saw agree upon, although they have many differences, and this is just a schematic of carbon sequestration. I'm sure as producers you know a lot about this already, and this is what regenerative agriculture hopes to advance, and more so than just to combat climate change, is to also replenish soil minerals and the microbiome and overall health.
Those of you who've been around for a long time have seen different things. One of the farms that we went to this week on the sourcing trip experience was at 2,100 meters. Well, 20 years ago, no one was growing coffee at 2,000 meters. It was like crazy to even think about. It was too cold. Frost damage was too much of a risk. But this now is not at 2,000 meters. This is at 1,300 meters in Honduras. These are really unhappy trees. This is at 2,000 meters. But there's much more moisture now in the air, and this is addressing the issue of whether it's human caused or not. I have my opinion, and just like I have my own asshole about what's causing it. But the fact is, it's happening, and we're seeing it. And this is an example. This should not be happening at 2,100 meters. California, Southern California, should not be a new coffee growing region. Right, those remember back in the day we used to talk about the coffee belt on 1,000 miles on either side of the equator. That was where coffee grew. No, now it's growing in Southern California, 70 farms. Right, and many of them are organic, which is nice, but we need to make sure that coffee can still be produced on your lands. And the sort of things that we're talking about in terms of regenerative and, in my opinion, organic agriculture will help that. This is my friend, Jay, one of our happy California coffee growers. He's actually near Santa Barbara, right, which is even more north than Los Angeles. And it just blows me away that he's growing beautiful, beautiful coffees there. I don't give out 90s easily. I'm actually kind of stingy with that, especially outside of a competition environment, but his coffees are beautiful.
So just to reiterate how important this movement is and how important producers are to this movement is that there's no escaping the headlines like that I saw on my news feed the other day of impacts of climate change, and they are anthropogenic causes. Human-caused climate change is super real, and carbon is the main culprit, and carbon sequestration is one of the biggest ways we can combat more horrible, horrible things happening than like the Gulf of Mexico being that much hotter. Just to save time, we can keep going.
This is an oversight of what the regenerative movement is about. It first was discussed by, I think, John Rodale, and this was how he described it. And I don't, should I read this so you can interpret it, or can you read it and interpret it with, I guess I'll just interpret it. The regenerative agricultural movement, well, you know, I'm just thinking about you as I'm doing this, and when you taught me instructor training, never read from your slides. While gaining recent popularity, has roots deeply embedded in indigenous farming practices across the globe, where people cultivated land in a way that aimed to replenish and enhance the soil health over generations. However, the term regenerative agriculture itself was coined by the Rodale Institute in the late 80s, with Robert Rodale at the forefront of popularizing the concept through research and publications, building upon the foundation of organic farming principles established by his father, John Rodale. Rodale Institute is one of the founding groups of the Regenerative Organic Alliance. They have 3 pillars. Soil health we talked about, and the soil health encompasses carbon sequestration, animal welfare, and social fairness. I call it social equity and animal equity. I'm going to go back to Brazil, not to pick on them, but I went to a farm. It was great that they were using cows, or actually bulls, to generate manure to use as fertilizer, but it was a huge pen of bulls in very close quarters, no shade cover, and the male bulls were mounting each other because they're lonely, I guess, and it just was a bad situation. So, do you need to take care of your animals or your employees to sequester carbon? No, but you need it not to be an asshole. I mean, you need to be a good human, I think, and this is sort of puts this into a format that formalizes that. Come on.
Over.
There we go.
The next. So this basically just yet another definition of what the Regenerative Organic Alliance defines as regenerative organic agriculture. So yeah, these include practices such as cover cropping, crop rotation, compost, no-till or minimal till strategies, and no chemicals. And these are just some examples that the ROA gives for vegetative cover, crop rotation, and minimal soil disturbance.
Right. Some of these things aren't so relevant to coffee growers, right? We don't do crop rotation. We plant trees and they stay there. And we don't really till the soil after you do your initial plantings. However, I was just at a group in a farm in Peru a month ago, Finca Churopampa, and they've done some very interesting things. They are doing crops in between the rows of coffee trees. They've extended the distance that they put between the trees so that they can do that, some of which are banana trees, which count as temporary sombrero for coverage, and as well as they're planting other fruit trees.
And here's an example of an agroforestry system in coffee. You might have seen something like this driving up here. I saw a lot of banana trees and timber and shade trees covering coffee trees on the way up, which is really cool to see. So just in general in the system, everything benefits and everything contributes, from the birds, the animals, the soil, the microbes, the plants. It's a whole cycle, and everything in an ideal cycle like this is self-sustaining and only adds to the enrichment of the environment.
And speaking of certifications, I was just reminded today, just before lunch, that if you're going to implement the agroforestry system, right, Laura, wherever you, I saw you in here somewhere. If you're going to get bird certified, can't do that within the 10 years of certification.
So yeah, just continuing the, some of the aspects of the 3 pillars of the Regenerative Organic Alliance definition. There's rotational grazing, so this applies more to other types of crops, but I'm really interested to hear if anybody has implemented grazing on their coffee farms. Come talk to me after. There's compost and soil amendments coming from organic matter, and as we've said many times, no chemicals.
Yeah, again, rotational crop grazing might be difficult for coffee, just like for grape growers, right? Because the animals will graze through the fields and eat the fruit. But what they're talking about there is actually having just fields that are open and separated by a zone, and allowing the animals to graze in one zone for a period of time, and then moving into another, and then moving into another, and doing cover crop, and then maybe planting that field at some point in the future after you move them to another, the animals to another area.
And this is just a shout out to Asobagri Co-op in Huehuetenango, Guatemala. They have a really cool biofabrica and lombricompost, and this is just an example of some organic methods of compost and fertilization. Next slide.
Right. I think we answered that question. This is the draft definition of organic, of regenerative in California. I'm not going to bore you with this because I'll let those who can read it, but it really doesn't say anything, right? And it just tries not to be offensive to anyone, and there's absolutely zero enforcement behind it. So when I brought that up to our Secretary of Agriculture, she's like, well, you know, it's for funding purposes, and so we can do for research. Okay, but it's not going to stop the complaints that we're getting from the regenerative organic farmers coming to our commission about how people who are not having to do everything that they're doing, they call themselves regenerative, because these guys are regenerative organic and these guys aren't, but they're getting the same or higher premiums on their products without having to be organic.
Oh, well, so there, as we talked about, there's kind of the big tent approach in which some of these certifiers are trying to get as many producers on board to their program, whether that's for the good of the planet or their pockets is up for debate. But we can go to the next slide to give an example of that. Regenagri, which we talked about, is kind of one of these examples. And they don't, as we said before, they don't require you to be organic, but they do have a very holistic and approach to, as you can see, all of the requirements that they ask of the producers. They don't also require any social equity certification, like fair trade or anything, but they do have their own definition of it.
Right. As you know, it's child and young labor, freely chosen employment. These are super important, right? And there's no visibility. If as a buyer, I don't have visibility unless I show up, and I keep showing up. And I found some child labor on the farm that we were buying from in Ethiopia, a fairly large farm. And I asked why they weren't in school. He said, "Oh, it's less dangerous here." Okay, great. So you know, you have 2,000 hectares. You're growing a lot of coffee. Why don't you pay for a teacher to come up here, rather than keeping them out of school and having them picking coffee instead? He had no answer. I had an answer, which was I canceled my contracts. And I had 5 containers I was buying from him.
So why is certification important? As we've kind of mentioned before, we want ideally everyone to be on the same page across the globe, but that's, you know, kind of impossible. But at least singing from the same songbook, like Jeff will say, is a step there. To me, certification is a way for consumers to easily recognize something that aligns with their values, so that benefits the seller and the buyer. And it is proven with organic certification through a few studies that it does increase chances that consumers will buy the product if they're looking for it, and they will pay the premium price for it. So even though a farm could be regenerative and do everything right and not have that label, they might not get that premium. So that's an argument for certification. We'll talk about arguments against it as well later on.
This is Byron Corrales of Los Pinos in Nicaragua, and I think it's Pino, they call it now Corrales Coffee. He's doing everything that he needs to do to be regeneratively organic certified. However, he can't find a social equity piece that fits his model. He's too big. He's got 6 farms. He owns 1 or 2, and he rents 4. He's too big for the small producer mark. Fair trade doesn't work. USA doesn't. Fair trade might work, but not really. So it's trying to find how to make that work, and that's where I think there's some reform that needs to happen in the certification. Is that how do you account for this guy who is basically, in my mind, he's a coffee mystic. I mean, he talks to his trees, he caresses the soil. I mean, he is like a coffee saint, and he's doing it not because he wants the premium. He's doing it because he's trying to make sure that the land that he's working on is in good shape for his kids.
Okay, so here are the concerns and controversies. This is kind of a dense section, but I'm hoping we have time for your contributions because all the producers on the ground are obviously dealing with these more than we are in our offices. So the first one that worries me a lot is big corporations kind of gaming the system with their own certifications. Sorry to point out Syngenta and Nestle, but they are examples of corporations that have put out their own certification program. And as far as my research, they're a little bit vague. They mention chemical inputs, but only say, for example, Syngenta says in their case studies that farmers work to reduce chemicals, but never say that the goal should be to totally eliminate them. Nestle is an example of a program in which they have their own agronomists do the audits, so that leaves room for some vague lack of transparency as well. This Smoke and Mirrors is a paper that I think is a really great one to read. It's very short, but a nice summary of all of the issues that can come with certification programs. And in this paper, basically, the scientists are saying that there's a whole scheme of greenwashing that is happening and can happen, and this has happened before with organic and other social welfare certifications. So yeah, I highly recommend. We have the link in our slides as well. Another concern is that certifications aren't the only way to communicate your farm practices, like we were just talking about. Ideally, the best way to communicate is with direct relationships, each company being very transparent in their practices, and ideally not needing a certification to prove that. Another concern is certifications impose just yet another bureaucratic system on producers. It takes a lot of paperwork and fees for audits and to sign up for the program. It is worthwhile if it works out, for sure, but it's, a lot of people don't have the time initially or the manpower or the woman power. And then consumer label fatigue is so real. There's on some coffee bags, you'll see 10 labels and everyone just kind of gives up trying to decipher what all of those mean and how they're different. So that adding another label, or if the slides prior where there were, a dozen labels, adding all of those, if one consumer is looking for specifically Regenified and another one is looking for ROA. It's just adds to the consumer label fatigue. And another one is consumer lack of awareness and misconceptions. The biggest one is that people who aren't sitting here now and working in agriculture or coffee don't really get why they have to pay more for another label. We're already paying so many premiums on organic and thoughtfully sourced coffee. A lot of consumers, especially that I've talked to, are tired of paying more and don't.
What does regenerative mean? Okay, so there is no law about what regenerative means. So it's a real quagmire. On this committee that I sit on in California, there's a big discussion, big thing going on trying to define for the state of California what regenerative means. A lot of people want it to include organic. A lot of people don't.
Certified and are trying to maintain it. I can pass the microphone to you.
Talk about premiums. Can you quantify the premium of regenerative versus organic?
That's a very good point.
When the organic premium is going down in many products, what would you say there?
What I would say is find out who your buyer is. Like Byron, we have a Zoom call every year. Well, we talk more than once a year, but we have a Zoom call every year. That's our official. How much are we going to pay you, and how much are you going to charge us? And let's discuss this, right? So there is no official premium for regenerative, but I buy a container from a group in Nicaragua called Sopexca, and they have a 25-cent premium they add to that. So it's, again, you need to work with whoever your exporter is or your co-op is and say, I need 25 cents more for this to help cover my certification. And the pain in the ass it is to maintain it, right? Because it's a burden, and you need to be compensated and compensated fairly, right? I would like to see everyone who drinks coffee come and have to work on a slope picking coffee for a day, just a day, maybe just even an hour, to appreciate how hard your job is, right? No one does until they've done it. I did it. I do it almost every time I go, and I'm like, ugh, this is rough, right? Especially as I'm getting older, my knees and my back, it's not easy. And that would understand why they should pay more, right?
So yeah, to summarize, there is no standardized premium because there's no one definition across the board. And that is, yeah.
So I'd say I would make a negotiated premium. The enforcer is the sales contract. Yeah, when I put my name on the contract, I pay. Oh no, that's the certification piece, right? So if I want this certification from you, I should be willing to help pay for it or pay for it entirely, right? If I want that, if I like your coffee enough, and I like you enough, I should pay for that. And it shouldn't be on you alone. It shouldn't come out of your family's pockets. And I think this is like, I know this is a very difficult concept maybe for some of you to think about, because it's like, negotiation is only fair if both sides are, have equal power. And I think sometimes the seller doesn't always think they have power. The seller's got power. Sopexca, I said, I think 25 cents is too much for that premium. She goes, well, you don't have to buy my coffee. Yeah, okay, you're fair. I guess I'll be paying 25 cents. But she, you know, if you want to learn negotiation, Fatima is, she's the one to talk to. She's tough. I don't know, are you?
Next, yeah, just we are almost out of time, so just we'll quickly do this, and then I have one more question for you all because I really want to hear from you all. So in terms of the financial piece, which we were just talking about, producer considerations, which I'm sure some of you have grappled with, are just access to extension and resources for regenerative amendments, like practices. You know, some farms are so far away from the nearest composting facility that it just makes it infeasible, for example. And then the annual costs of certification are just prohibitive for some. They can definitely be worth it when you get the system down, but they vary between all of those certifications that we show you. They vary pretty widely, especially depending if it's an internal versus a third-party audit, just the number of people you have to pay for, and just the time cost of doing all the administrative and paperwork. And industry-wide considerations should be, first and foremost, who should shoulder this cost. We don't want it to all fall on producers. Ideally, the buyer is helping with the certification costs, and consumers should take on some of the cost, but there definitely has to be a way to share this across the value chain. Premiums and cost sharing could be really vital to the regenerative organic movement. Just like the organic certification has some cost sharing programs that has been helpful, I think, for some farmers to implement organic practices. Lastly, industry considerations will regenerative labels sway consumers to actually buy it? It's a little too soon to tell, but preliminary studies say yes. And will they buy it at a higher price than organic? If I'm remembering the number off the top of my head, only 19% of consumers who answered this most recent study in 2024 could recognize what regenerative means versus a majority of consumers who recognize what organic means on a label. So there's hope, but it's not there yet. And if there's any quick...
I'd like to add one thing, just so you have a question, okay.
Hey, it's very interesting, this talk. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. But I think that the end is also about how we educate our consumers so they can be aware of what they are buying, right? Which, guys, do you think could be the tools to educate those consumers who can evaluate what we are giving to them and with these labels too?
As a journalist, I would say we need to talk about it more in media and on the roaster and retail level. Little blurbs about it on coffee bags are always a great thing. I do think the labels do help a lot just with visual recognition. Jeff might have a different answer.
Yeah, I was going to agree. I think that's the roaster's job primarily, to take care of that and support the grower that way. I think there is the danger of confusion, as I mentioned, about regenerative, being confused for regenerative organic as an integral part of what it means when it doesn't. And just so you know, those who you're not certified, there is a market out there. I mean, when I was in Brazil, I was speaking to the largest co-op in the world, right? Anyway, I'm blanking on the name. But she's like, who wants organic coffee, right? Okay, well, I buy 2 million pounds a year of organic coffee. Mayorga, I'm guessing, buys more than that, and I think your guys are doing over $1 million, between $1 million and $1.5 million, right, pounds of year of coffee. There's a market for organic coffee and for certified coffees. So your job is to do the best job you can do growing it, and I encourage you to pierce the veil, the curtain of the co-op and the exporter, and find out who's buying your coffee, and meet them, and talk to them. I think
we are out of
that's us.
time,
Yeah.
but we would love to talk to you if you have any more questions, or if you want we have extensive notes in the Google Slides presentation with a lot of these studies if you want to see them, or email us at either of these emails. And muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias.